Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about Samuel. Okay, so the next book of the Bible after Judges and Ruth is Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel. And I'm going to tell you the beginning of Samuel's life. So there was a man who was an Israelite whose name was Elkanah. And he had two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. And back then that was a normal thing for a man to do, although it was not what God wanted. It didn't work out very well. I think you can imagine why. As you can imagine, he liked one better than the other. It was Hannah that Elkanah preferred. But Hannah could not have children. And back then, having children was a very big deal. Men were considered better than women. A woman that was married was considered better than a woman that was unmarried. And a woman that had children was better than a woman that did not have children. And a woman that had sons was better than a woman that had daughters. So there was like a hierarchy. And Hannah was married, but she had no children at all. So she was below on the totem pole to Peninnah. Well, Peninnah was jealous of Hannah because her husband liked Hannah better, but Peninnah had children. And so because of her jealousy of Hannah, she would poke at her and bug her and bug her and bug her and point out the fact that she didn't have children and point out the fact that Peninnah did have children and constantly make that a very big deal in front of Hannah. Well, every year Elkanah would take his family to Shiloh, where the tabernacle was in Israel, so that they could worship the Lord. They didn't have a tabernacle in every town, so once a year they would go and offer their sacrifices and worship the Lord in the tabernacle. So here they are, they're traveling to Shiloh to worship God, and as usual, Peninnah was bothering Hannah and constantly provoking her about the fact that she had no children. And when they sat down to eat, Elkanah would give food to Peninnah and to her children, but then when it came to Hannah, he would give her extra food because, of course, he liked her best and he wanted her to know that he loved her. But Peninnah was so mean to Hannah and made her feel so terrible she couldn't even eat the food, and she was crying, and Elkanah was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? You know I love you. Why are you crying? Aren't I better to you than 10 sons? I guess that was a common phrase. Remember, we heard about that in Ruth as well. The townspeople said that Ruth was better than 10 sons to Naomi. So Elkanah did not understand the hurt that was in Hannah's heart. She really wanted to have children. And so she went off to the tabernacle by herself. She went there to pray. It seems as though this was an uncommon practice back then for people to privately pray to the Lord, but she had such a burden in her heart about her lack of children that she went into the tabernacle all by herself, and she knelt down to pray, and she was crying, and her heart was so heavy, and she was so burdened about this that she was praying with her lips moving, but no words were coming out. Now the priest, whose name was Eli, was sitting by a pillar in the tabernacle, and he saw her there, and he saw her mouthing the words of her prayer and no sound coming out, and he thought that she was drunk, and he came over very angry, and he kind of yelled at her. He said, "Put the liquor away from you, woman. What are you doing in the tabernacle when you're drunk? You should leave. You should not be drinking alcohol." And Hannah said, "No, you're mistaken. I am not drunk. I haven't been drinking any alcohol at all. I've been praying. I've been pouring out my heart to God. I have a very special request." And so Eli was very sad that he had kind of attacked her, and he said, "May the Lord grant you your request that you have had of him." So Hannah went back and she felt much better. She felt quite sure that God had answered her prayer. And her prayer, of course, was that she would have a baby. But not only that, she had prayed that she would have a son. And she made a promise to God. She told God, if you will give me a son, I will give him back to you to serve him all the days of his life. So when little baby Samuel was born to Hannah, she prepared him from the very beginning to go back and serve the Lord in the temple. That was her purpose. And so she taught him from the beginning what he was going to be doing and why he was going to the temple and who God was. And she did a very good job of teaching Samuel. Now, at that point when Elkanah went to take his family to Shiloh, she said, no, I'm not going to go. I'm going to wait until Samuel is big enough to go, and then I will leave him there to serve in the temple. So for a little while, a few years maybe, she did not go to the temple. But then when Samuel was old enough, she brought him to the temple and she met with Eli. And she said, I don't know if you remember me. I am the woman that you saw praying in the tabernacle. I was crying. Do you remember? And you thought I was drunk, but I wasn't. This is what I had asked God for. I asked him for a son, and I promised to give him back to God to serve God all the days of his life. So I'm bringing him here to you to help you out at the temple. Well, Eli was very happy with having a little helper in the temple. You see, Eli was getting quite old and his eyes were growing dim. He was getting so he couldn't see very well. He was a very big man. It was hard for him to get around. So it was helpful for him to have this young boy to run around and do the errands for him. So Samuel seems to have been quite helpful and obedient, and he had a good attitude. He had a purpose for what he was doing, and he helped in the temple with Eli. He did whatever Eli told him to do. But Eli had two other sons. They were named Hophni and Phinehas, and they were much older than Samuel. They were men. We don't know exactly how old they were, but they were wicked. They were vile. They were evil. They were priests in the temple because they were sons of Eli, but they were not good. They did not worship God. They did not honor God. In fact, not only did they sin, but they caused the people coming to the temple to sin. When the people would bring their sacrifices to the temple, Hophni and Phinehas would steal some of the meat so that they could eat it themselves before it could be sacrificed. And they did other things that were even worse, causing women to sin as well. And so the people didn't even want to go to the tabernacle anymore because Hophni and Phinehas were like big bullies who were causing trouble with the people that came to the tabernacle. Well, God was very upset about this situation. Eli tried to talk to his sons, telling them that what they were doing was wrong and they needed to stop, that God would punish them, but they did not listen to him. A prophet had given a prophecy that God was going to punish Hophni and Phinehas. And then one night, in the middle of the night, when Samuel was sleeping, he heard someone call his name. Now Samuel had been trained to be very obedient. As soon as he heard his name called, even though it was the middle of the night, he hopped out of bed and he ran to Eli and he said, Eli, Eli, you called. What do you need me for? And Eli said, I didn't call you. Stop waking me up. Go back to bed. It's your imagination. So Samuel went back to bed. And then he heard his name called again and he hopped out of bed again, even though he had just been told, go back to bed. He ran to Eli again. And Eli said, you need to go back to bed. I did not call you. So it happened again the third time. Samuel, Samuel. Samuel hopped out of bed and went to Eli, even though Eli had been gruff with him, telling him to go back to bed. And this time, Eli figured out what was going on. And he thought, oh, maybe it's God who wants to speak with Samuel. And so he said, next time you hear the voice, say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant heareth." And so Samuel went back to bed, and he did hear the voice again, "Samuel, Samuel." So Samuel sat up and he said just what Eli had told him to. He said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant heareth." And God told Samuel a message. It was not a nice message. It was a message for Eli, about Eli and his family, his sons. And basically it was that God was going to punish them for the evil of Hophni and Phinehas. He said that to show that the judgment would come and that it was a judgment from God, Hophni and Phinehas would die both in the same day. Not only that, but there would not be any more priests in Eli's line. None of his descendants would be priests anymore. They had lost that privilege from God. And all of the young men in his family would die when they were quite young. They would never get old because of the evil of Hophni and Phinehas. Well, poor Samuel, it was a difficult message, and he was afraid to tell the message. The next morning he got up and he went about the chores that he had around the temple, but Eli knew that there was probably a message from God. So he called him over and he said, "Samuel, you need to tell me what God said. It is very important that you tell me everything. Don't leave one thing out." And so Samuel went ahead and told him everything that God had said. He had to be very courageous because he was afraid to tell such a difficult message. But he did tell it, and Eli's reaction was, "May the Lord do what seemeth good to him." And so Samuel continued working in the temple, or the tabernacle, and Eli continued there as well as the high priest for some time. And all of Israel came to know about Samuel. Everybody knew who he was, and they all knew that he was a prophet of God, that God used him to speak to him, to tell the people messages from God. And the Bible says a very special thing about Samuel. It says that he grew in stature and in favor with God and man. So he was in favor with God, and he was also in favor with men. He was a good boy who grew into a good man who honored God and did what God said, and people respected him. They knew that they could trust Samuel because of the kind of person that he was. And so next time we will talk more about what happened next in the book of Samuel. Have a good week. Thanks.